Hello and welcome to our third lesson on probability. I'm Mr. Chowdhury and today we're going to be looking at sample space diagrams. If you haven't already, I suggest you go watch our first two videos on what a probability is and how to find probabilities of single events. But today your first task is going to be this. If I was to flip one coin, how many different outcomes would I have? If I was to flip one coin, how many different outcomes would I have? Well, on a coin there are only two different outcomes that we can get. The outcomes you can have is a head or a tail. Now the next question I want to ask you is if I flipped two coins or I flipped one coin twice, what are the different outcomes I could have? And these are the different outcomes and I'll talk you through them. So I could have a head followed by a head, so heads heads. I could then have a head followed by a tail. I could have that. And then I could have a tail followed by a head. And then I could have a tail and a tail. Any other orientation or any other combination, of the coins would be just a repeat, and these are the four that you can have. And what I've tried to do is go through these outcomes as systematically as possible. So I've went, okay, what are the options if I had two heads? Well, if I had two heads, the only option I can have is heads and heads. Well, what if I only had one head? Well, the two options I can have if I have one head is a head and a tail and a head. And then what if I had no heads? Well, I could have a tail and a tail. If I had no heads, that's what I'd have. So here's what I'd like you to do. Pause the video and think to yourself, what happens if I flipped four coins, or if I flipped one coin four times? What would the outcomes be? Pause the video, have a think. Okay, I'll help you out a little bit. The outcomes you could have is, so you could have something along the lines of four heads, and then you could have three heads, two heads, one head, and no heads. So how many different ways can we get four heads? How many different ways can we get three heads? How many different ways can we get two heads? How many different ways can we have one head? And how many different ways can we have zero heads? So pause the video and have another go. Try and be as systematic as possible. The more systematic you are, the less likely, you are to miss a combination. So pause the video again, have a think. Okay, so let's have a look at the answers. So the only way we can get four heads is to have heads, 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 heads. The ways we can get three heads is if you had heads, 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 tails, and then heads, heads, tail, heads, then heads, tail, heads, heads, then tail, heads, heads, heads. Notice if you're going to look at this, the tail is just moving one position each time, and that way it's more systematic and I'm less likely to miss a combination. Here's the combinations of having two tails. Once again, the tails are just moving one space each time, and then one heads is as such and no heads is at the bottom. And these are all of the different ways you could have, all of the different combinations you could have for if I flipped four coins or one coin four times. These are all of the different outcomes that we could get. We could get heads, 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 all the way down to tails, 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 tails. And these are all of them. And there's 16 of them here. So where might we find the limitations of listing outcomes? Well, if you think about it, this may have been very difficult. What if I had 100 coins? What if I had 4 coins? What if I had 50 coins? It becomes more difficult. And there are some limitations to listing outcomes when it becomes very difficult. And here's another example. So here, I've got the outcomes for rolling one dice. So the outcomes for rolling one dice are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's what I can get for rolling one dice. The outcomes for rolling two dice. Now suddenly it becomes more difficult. So if you look at the outcomes for rolling two dice, it's rolling a 1 on the first dice and a 1 on the second dice, 1 and a 2, 1 and a 3, 1 and a 4, 1 and a 5, 1 and a 6, and so on and so forth. There are 36 different outcomes to rolling two dice, but as you can see, listing them becomes very time consuming, and if you're not systematic and careful, you may miss some combinations. So what we do in that situation is when we're trying to list the different outcomes of two mutually exclusive events, we use what is called a sample space diagram, and this is what it would look like for rolling two dice. There we are. There's our sample space diagram. And here's what we're going to do with this sample space diagram. We're going to fill it in to help us see if you can win a game. As you can see, what I've got is the dice rolls of one dice on the top and the dice rolls of another dice on the bottom. So we can see I can get a 1 and a 1, a 1 and a 2, a 1 and a 3, a 1 and a 4. And by using the sample space diagram, I'm less likely to miss any combinations. So here's what we're going to do now. Here's your task. So we're going to play a game. I'm going to roll these 2 dice and I'm going to add the 2 numbers up. You're going to be asked to pick a number, and if your number comes up, you will win. Which number would you want and why? Pause the video, have a think. Which number would you want to win this game and why would you pick that number? Pause the video, have a think. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is populate this table. And the way we're going to do it is we know we're adding the 2 numbers together on our dice. We're adding the 2 numbers together. So I'm going to add 1 and 1, which gives me 2. 1 and 2 gives me 3. 1 and 3 gives me 4, so on and so forth. So we need to populate this table. So if you populate this table, this is what it looks like. That's what it's going to look like once we've populated it. We can see that there are 36 different outcomes that we can get. 36 different combinations that we can have. Because it's 6 by 6, so there's 36 different combinations we can have. We can also see which one is the most likely. And the most likely is that leading diagonal there. That's the one that's the most likely. So the number you would want to pick if you wanted to win our game was 7. Because 7 is made on the dice in the most ways. We can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ways you can make a 7 out of 36 numbers that we could possibly have. There are 6 7s out of the 36 outcomes. So that means that we have a 6 in 36 chance of rolling a 7. Which is the highest probability compared to any other number. So if you were to look at 3, I've only got 2 ways of making a 3 out of 36. So that's 236. 7 is significantly higher. If we look at 6 here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways of making a 6. That's 5 out of 36, which is still smaller than 6 out of 36. So we know if you wanted to win this game, you're best off picking 7. You're best off picking 7 if you wanted to win this game. And that's where sample space diagrams become very, very useful, because not only can we make sure we have all of the possible outcomes very quickly and very easily, but also finding probabilities from a sample space diagram isn't difficult at all, because we can easily see the total number of outcomes and then we can work out the number of desired outcomes to try and work out our probability. So here's what I need you to do. So you want to become very confident at drawing sample space diagrams. So here's what we're going to do. There are 3 questions there and you're going to draw the sample space diagram for each one. So I'll do the first one with you and then you can have a go at the second 2. So the first one is rolling a die and flipping a coin. So what's our table going to look like? Well, our table will look like this. Once I've done it and I've populated it, this is what our table will look like. And the reason it will look like this is because I need a heads and a tails for the coin, and I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the dice. So I can get a heads and a 1, a heads and a 2, a heads and a 3, and so on until I get a heads and a 6. And I can do the same thing for the bottom one as well. So you can see this is what my table would look like, and I filled it in. I'd like you to do that for the next 2 questions. So pause the video, have a go at that, please. Okay, so now let's go through the answers to question 2 and question 3. So for question 2, this is what your table should look like. I've got the days of the week and the dice numbers, and I populated it so I can get a Monday and a 1, Monday 2, Monday 3, Monday 4, Monday 5, Monday 6, so on and so forth to kind of populate this table. And then the last one, for subtracting, it would look like this, where there is a leading 0. You can see that. And then I've got all the other numbers in there, so 2 take away 1, 3 take away 1, 4 take away 1, and so on and so forth. Now, before we move on and we do anything else, I'd just like to summarize what we're talking about in terms of sample space diagrams and the key points that you need to take away from this video. The key points are: sample space diagrams are quick and easy way to find combinations of outcomes of mutually exclusive events. We can only use sample space diagrams when we have exactly 2 events. If we have 3 events that we're looking at, you'd need a sample space cube, and that would be hard to draw. So we stick to sample space diagrams when it's 2 mutually exclusive events. And the last one is the number of outcomes is basically just the multiplying the number of outcomes for each event. So for example, when I said if you roll 2 dice, the number of outcomes was 36, because on one dice there's 6 possible outcomes, on the other dice there's 6 possible outcomes, so there's 36 outcomes total. A dice and a coin, one has 2 possible outcomes, the other one has 6 possible outcomes, so there's 12 outcomes in that case. Hopefully this has been helpful and you are feeling a bit more confident about sample space diagrams. What I suggest you do is go and watch Mr. Amison's video to do some practice. If you're super confident with Mr. Amison's video and you're feeling really confident and want to challenge yourself, go on Dr. Frost and Corbett Maths to do some questions on your own and improve yourself that way. Go off, be productive, and I'll see you in the next video.